Today's shiur is a continuation of last week's shiur called Clean Hands and a Pure Heart, the kabbalistic significance of the copper laver or the wash basin, and the significance of the daily hand washing that we wash every day. It is a great paradox that we find that the very item that was responsible for the kiddush yadayim veraglayim, the sanctification of the hands and the feet of the priests before they commenced their service, was used from an item that represents vanity, and that is the copper mirrors of the women who came out of Egypt. The Jewish women who came out of Egypt donated the mirrors to Moshe Rabbeinu, and in fact Moshe Rabbeinu was so annoyed at this when they came to the Ohel Moed. At that time the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, was the tent of Moshe Rabbeinu, because at that time the Mishkan was not yet built, the tabernacle was not yet built or erected, and that was the place of studying of Torah. That was a place where God revealed himself to Moshe Rabbeinu. That was a place where people gathered to pray. Very holy place. And the women came, and all simultaneously, without any coordination, and they donated their mirrors, a large percentage of them. It does not say exactly how many. And we mentioned last week that there is a very significant question. All the items, it says their size, it says how big it's going to be or how much it weighs, and yet this one, it did not include the size. And it's obvious that the reason is because it was something that was totally dependent upon the women who gave. The women who gave their copper mirrors, it was dependent upon them. Less than the copper laver would be smaller, more than the copper wash basin laver would be bigger. And we have to understand that the Almighty not only sanctioned this, but was very pleased with the gift of the women. What is it that Moshe Rabbeinu did not understand? What is it that Moshe Rabbeinu was missing and lacking in the contribution or the feelings that the women came forward? There's two answers that I would like to suggest later on. But before we do so, there are very important two questions that we must discuss. And that is words of the very verse that describe the wash basin, the water of the wash basin. Firstly, it says in the pasuk, and whenever it refers to the wash basin, it says, "Venatata shama mayim," and you shall place there water. And it says this a few times, different ways, but you shall place there water. Why does it say, "Venatata shama mayim," and water shall be there? Why does it not say, "Venatata bo mayim"? When you're talking about shama, it's a place. When you're talking about an item of the laver or the wash basin, "Venatata bo mayim," it should say. Not "Venatata shama mayim." It's as if to say that there is a special mitzvah that in the tabernacle there must be water. In the tabernacle there must be water. That's seemingly the meaning of this verse. What holds the water, that is the laver, the tabernacle, but "Venatata shama mayim," there seems to be a great dagesh, because it repeats this a few times, that there must be water there in the tabernacle. That's number one. Question number two, why does it say, "Yirhatsu mayim," they shall wash water? You don't say they shall wash water. You wash with water. You don't wash water. So what is the symbolism here? Must they wash the water? Do the Kohanim wash the water? Or do they wash with water? You obviously wash with water. So again, it should have said, "Yirhatsu ba mayim," you should wash with water, and not "Yirhatsu mayim," you should wash water. Almost as if to indicate that The Kohanim have to go and wash the water. How do you wash water? So these are very important questions that we must discuss. We've already indicated that the purpose of the Mishkan is to elevate man and to elevate the world. And the Mishkan was also a Mikdash, of which, as we mentioned last week, the Mikdash, the only time it's used is when it refers to, according to the Al-Shikh and others, according to man. Which means that there must be a sanctuary within the hearts of men, and there must be a sanctuary, a holy place in the world. So it is obvious that the whole intention of the Mishkan and the Mikdash is to elevate the world, to uplift the world, and to elevate man, and as well to arouse or cause atonement for sin. The holy kabbalist Rabbi Chaim Vital, which was the star disciple of the holy Arizal, he was older than the Arizal. The Arizal said that my whole purpose in coming to this world was only for him, because he was the one who actually wrote all the writings of the Arizal. He was the proper disciple that understood it properly and conveyed it and wrote it down. So the teachings of the Arizal, besides the other disciples that were there and received the teachings and conveyed it and also wrote books, but Rabbi Chaim Vital was the main one who wrote the Kitvei Arizal, the writings of the Arizal. And he writes a very interesting thing, and it's also quoted in Tanya, the Sefer Tanya Kadisha. And he says that everything about this world is made up of 4 elements. Man too. There are 4 elements. And as we said before, really the whole world is a reflection of man. The 4 elements are Esh, Maim, Afar, and Ruach. Fire or energy, water or liquid, Avir, air or gas, Maim, water or liquid. Did we say? No, Afar. We missed Afar. We missed dust or mineral. These are the 4 elements. Reb Chaim Vital says that all of our negative characteristic traits are associated with those 4 elements. Since they are physical, we have a physical dimension to us that takes on the characteristics in a negative way of those 4 elements. And what are they? Fire. The nature of fire is to arouse, is to go up, like a person who gets angry or who is arrogant. He raises himself up like a fire. When a person is enraged, he's like a destructive fire. He raises himself like a fire. Then there's another negative characteristic trait of afar, of dust or mineral. It's heavy, it's weighty, it falls down, it drops, like a person who has the nature of laziness or depression. Person is lazy, he couldn't be bothered, he's not motivated by anything, nothing motivates him, nothing moves him, he always wants to sit down, watch the cricket, watch the football, and vetulo, and nothing more. As well as depression. Depression also. When a person has, God forbid, depression, and it's something that can be controlled, by the way, according to the Hachamim. It's something that we can change our focus, our mindset, and we can change our mood. And the negative aspect of that is that, again, you're lacking motivation. Couldn't be bothered in anything, doing anything, etc. It's a very negative characteristic trait. Then there is ruach, which is air or gas, and that is the source of holelut, veletzanut, the source of vanity, of lightheadedness, People talk about nothingness and jokes around, and it's got no weight to it, it's got no substance to it, it's got nothing, it's empty, it's void. It's like vanity. And then there's mayim, water. Water is the symbol of ta'avot, of desires and of pleasures. Because mayim matzmihim kol minei ta'anugim. Mayim is the source and the root that brings forth and allows to grow and develop all different pleasures of this world. Without water, you cannot exist. And perhaps another explanation to that is water has this level of tranquility and pleasure and quenches a thirst. When a person is very thirsty, he drinks water, it quenches his thirst. So too when a person is impassioned by something, by a pleasure or a desire, and he fulfills them, he feels quenched like one with water. In the temple in the Mishkan, we have these 4 elements. They must be there. They must be expressed there. Because everything of us must be elevated and turned towards God. We have fire, for example. Fire that consumes, that burns, that eradicates and removes the impurity, our sins. The altar forgives and atones for sins. There are certain things that cannot be elevated, must be just burnt and removed. There's a fire that illuminates, for example, of the candelabra. There's a light can be used to give light or to cook. Many things in the temple were cooked. When you cook something, you refine it. You make it edible. You make it usable. There's earth, the very place of the Bet HaMikdash. There's the elements, the minerals that were made. The altar itself is made out of earth or stone. And then there is water. V'natata shama mayim. It doesn't say v'natata bo mayim. Place in it water, but you must place there water, which indicates, yes, water represents our desires, our natural lusts. They must be represented there in the tabernacle. They must be there as well. Why? There are 2 types of desires. There's one of forbidden things and one of not forbidden things. One that is permitted, but we do it because we desire it and we want to do it. It gives us pleasure. Those that are forbidden must be atoned through the mizbeach, through the altar. But those that are permitted can be uplifted and elevated, like the water. Water is the symbol of desire and pleasure. That too has a place and must be represented in the tabernacle because it can be uplifted. And that's why it says, V'natata shama mayim. Water must be there, must be present in the tabernacle, because our objective is to elevate everything in this world. And therefore, our physical life, eating, drinking, relationships, they can be focused for the service of God. They can be so uplifted that they too belong in the tabernacle. One act in particular that symbolizes the lust or the pleasure of man is the act of intimacy, where it could be an act that is responsible for continuity and for love and for harmony between a husband and wife. Or it could be an act that represents the very failing of man, as we have seen throughout history, throughout society. What was unique about the women in Egypt was that both they and the men were broken. And one of the reasons why Paro decreed harsh physical labor upon the Jews was because he wanted to reduce the numbers of the Jews. He wanted the Jews to disappear. And if you work hard and you have hard physical labor, two things happened. A, you just don't have no mood to engage in normal family life. And when you're so broken and so shattered, and decree upon decree, and your children are being killed, you say to yourself, this is what I want to bring children to the world for. It makes you lose hope in the future. These women were so wondrous and so wonderful and so courageous that they used these mirrors to project themselves and their husbands, to show and to give them a faith in the future. Despite the difficulties, despite the travesty that's taking place and the decrees, we do see a future together. We do see children in the world. Let us not play God. Let us do our part. And by doing our part, we will ensure that there will be a Jewish future. And that is exactly what they did. And therefore, the mirror was used as a tool to take something that is so base, and it so symbolizes human passion or desire, and take it and use it for the service of God. That it becomes constructive, that it builds a nation, that it becomes a tool for hope and faith in God and in our future destiny as a people. Totally elevated to such unparalleled heights that when the Jewish people were called upon to give donations, it felt so natural to them that these mirrors belong in the temple. Because that's exactly what they did. They did the exact purpose of what the temple or the tabernacle is all about. To take the human psyche, to take the human weakness, and to uplift it to the greatest of heights. And it seemed so natural, without any coordination, one woman with another, that they just came and presented themselves to the tent of Moshe Rabbeinu. And as Onkelos writes, it's a place of study and a place of prayer. And they didn't give the donation to the place where the normal donations were. They felt that this donation belongs in a holy place, holier than all the other donations. And indeed, Moshe Rabbeinu was quite taken by this paradox. You want to take these items that represents vanity, and you want to give it to the tabernacle, and no less the place that you chose is the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, the place where we gather to study Torah, where God reveals Himself. So I'd like to not second guess Moshe Rabbeinu, but just to perhaps give two suggestions. There's a possibility that Moshe Rabbeinu did not recognize to what extent or how holy these women were. Although he was a great teacher and a prophet, not necessarily was it revealed to him their noble intentions in Egypt and how they took a human act and they turned it into something godly. And remember, the concept of marriage is a very special one in Torah. It's not only sanctioned by God, but it's blessed by God. It's one that invites God to the lives of a young couple. Even the very act of intimacy is considered an act of great holiness. But the mirrors so easily could be used for vanity, for sin, perhaps. So there's a possibility that Moshe Rabbeinu did not appreciate what level they were. Or perhaps, if I may boldly suggest, the reason is because, yes, I understand that they did a mitzvah, and I understand that their intentions were great and were noble. But can you equate it to Ohel Moed, to the tent of meeting, where there is divine revelation, the place of study and the place of prayer? Is it parallel? Is it on the same level? Despite the fact that it's a great mitzvah, despite the fact that their acts were very noble and directed towards the sake of heaven. Can you equate it to Torah study? Maybe this was what perplexed Moshe Rabbeinu. And the answer of God was yes. Because this is the objective of the whole Torah. To penetrate every aspect of our psyche, of our being, and uplift it. And this is the answer to why the verse specifically says, Yirhetsu mayim, they shall wash water, not Yirhetsu ba mayim, they shall wash with water. When you wash with water. Over here it doesn't say you shall wash with water. It says you shall wash the water. Yirhetsu mayim, you shall wash the water. What does it mean you shall wash the water? Now, based upon the works of the holy Rabbi Chaim Vital, we understand. Water is a symbol of pleasures, the sensual acts of man. That too has a place in the Mishkan. That too can be turned into the service of God. But the condition is that we have to wash it. We have to cleanse it. The mayim, the water that is a symbol of desires or pleasures, must be washed, must be purified, must too be directed towards the service of God. And that's why it says, Yirhetsu mayim and not ba mayim. They shall wash the water, should cleanse the water. This is similar to when we shall wash our hands. We said before that the Kohanim, they wash their hands, they wash the feet. The reason why they wash their hands and feet is because that's the extremities of man. That's the very extreme part of our body. That represents that which is most external. And as we spoke about last week, the impurities latch on to that which is most external. When we wash our hands in the morning, according to the kabbalistic approach, remember last week we outlined 4 different reasons why we wash our hands in the morning. One of them, the kabbalistic approach, is that when we wash our hands, when we go to sleep, our souls goes up, and there's the impurity that remains latched onto our extremities, our most extreme or external part of who we are and what we are. Because impurity is not something that is an intrinsic, core, essential part of us. It's external. The Kabbalists teach us that this comes from what's called koach makif. Koach makif, or makif, refers to a light that doesn't penetrate your core. It remains aloof, it remains external. Because everything in this world must be rooted in holiness and purity, in godliness. Nothing can exist without godliness. So the Kabbalist explains to us that the difference between when something is enlivened or the energy that comes from God exists within a person, he's able to recognize it if he wants to and nullify himself before God. The impurities also come from the energy of God because nothing can exist without godliness. But that is something more external. For this reason, the incense, which were a symbol, and we discussed this one time, if you remember, one of the shurim, the spices in the temple were 11 that correspond to the 11 kitrin de masabuta, the crowns of impurity. In holiness there are 10, in impurity there are 11. They also have 10, the 10 expressions or emanations by which we use as a tool to express ourselves. So too impurity. God made this corresponding to this equilibrium in the world. The incense has one spice, all of the 10 are mixed together, but there's one spice, the lavona, that stays on top that is not mixed. That refers to the attribute of godliness that never penetrates the impurity. That's why they're able to remain in purity. because godliness never penetrates them, doesn't change their core. They never recognize it. They never feel godliness. Because it's something that is hitzoni, it's the extremities. It's not the core of who we are. It's not intrinsic to who we are. And that's why it latches on always, the impurities latch on always to the extremities. And therefore, we must take these extremities and purify them through water. Why through water? Because it's the water that is the symbol of desires and pleasures that can cause our greatest weakness, that can cause the extremities or our weaknesses or the impurity to ensnare us, to weaken us, to latch onto us and cause us to lose our identity. So what do? We take water that is the very symbol of man's weakness or desire or pleasure, and we take it and we harness it, and we use it for holiness, and we wash away the extremities or the influences of the impurity, that it should not control us, but rather we should control it. That we can then control our passions, our desires, and utilize it for the sake of God. And this is why the blessing, if you notice, when we wash our hands, we say, Baruch Ata Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, al netilat yadayim. We bless Hashem for commanding us concerning the commandment, the mitzvah of washing our hands. But the expression, the language structure that is used for washing of the hands is not washing of the hands at all. Netilat yadayim. So the sages comment and say netilah because one of the reasons called netilat yadayim is because we must wash with a vessel. And in Aramaic, it's called natla. The vessel is called natla. So we say al netilat yadayim, indicating that the mitzvah is specifically through a natla, through a vessel. Others explain the word netilah means to uplift. The mitzvah is not just to wash our hands, because it's got nothing to do with cleanliness. It's got to do with sanctity. And sanctity is to uplift. And this is the whole purpose of man, to uplift. To uplift our hands, that represents the most external part of us. What is the most intrinsic and internal part of us? Our thoughts, our emotion. Next is speech. It's still bound up with what we feel and what we think, but we express it to others. The most external is our world and our realm of action. That is the most external part of us. We must take that and we must uplift it and elevate it. I will be discussing this concept a little bit more in another shiur when we speak about David HaMelech. But I will just mention it briefly over here. One of the intentions that the Kabbalists teach us when we actually wash our hands, because we mentioned before, the mitzvah is not just to wash our hands. The mitzvah is to lift our hands, netilat yadayim, to lift our hands. The custom is to actually lift our hands towards our mind, our head. Why? Because we mentioned before that our hands are the most external part of us. They represent the world, the realm of action. They can be a symbol of our lowest part. And the objective of man is to take it and uplift it to the level of da'at, where we are fully in control. The attribute of da'at, of knowledge, is when we know something and it becomes so much a part of us that it becomes the bridge to our emotions and our actions. That it totally controls and dictates our emotions and our actions. So one of the intentions when we wash our hands is we actually ask Hashem to empower us, to give us the strength and enthusiasm and the ability that our mind, that our da'at, that our knowledge should control our emotions and thus our actions. And thus our actions becomes uplifted to the level of the inner core, the inner part of who we are, our thoughts. So that's what Netilat Yadayim is all about. And then this answers the question of Moshe Rabbeinu of what are you doing here? Moshe Rabbeinu was ready to drive them out. The answer is that the objective and the service of man is not just to study Torah, it's not just to pray, but it's to uplift everything about us, and we have the opportunity and the ability to do so. In fact, the Kabbalists teach us that that when a person overcomes and overpowers his weaknesses, overpowers his evil inclination because he wants to serve God, he causes a great revelation of godly light in the world, one that is so high that is what's called equal in all worlds. Such a light is so high because usually the light that comes into this world is measured. It's measured. It's dependent upon the vessel. How refined the vessel is how much godliness enters that vessel. An animal is not going to have the same godliness, godly spark, or godly soul as a human being. A blade of grass is not going to have the same energy as an animal, etc. and so forth. But when a person overcomes his weaknesses, when a person uplifts his weaknesses for the sake of God, he reveals a godly light that is way beyond any limitations. It is a godly light that will be revealed when Mashiach comes. And this is a very formidable form of service of God. One that represents the very purpose of why we created, why the world was created. And therefore, we can understand how and why, interestingly enough, the very symbol of ta'avot, or pleasures, is the very item that we use for sanctifying our hands. Because, as we mentioned before, the Reb Chaim Vital writes that water is a symbol of pleasures. It gives growth to all pleasures. It is interesting that the very symbol of pleasures is that which we wash our hands with, and we begin our service, the Kohanim and us, we begin our service of God, because that is the whole intention. The whole intention is to remind us every single day before we begin our day, hang on a minute, don't rush into this world so quickly, because this world has a potential hazard. And the potential hazard is that you become so succumbed, so submitted to this world, that it overpowers you. So before we begin our day, aside from all of the reasons why we mentioned last week, why we have to wash our hands, one of the most powerful messages that we could ever remind ourselves is, ladies and gentlemen, our objective today is, like an announcement before we make a takeoff, we are going to be landing and arriving in such and such and such. Our mission statement every single day is that not only we should not be overcome by the pleasures and the desires that we face every single day, but rather we should take them and uplift them for the service of God. And we have the ability to do so. And we have the power and potential to do so. And this is a very refreshing and very powerful message that God gives us every single day. And that the women taught us this through the very symbol of vanity that they used for holiness. And therefore now we understand why this item was the very item that causes us sanctity, that reminds us how to be holy, how to be pure, how to take the physical, mundane things and turn it l'shem shamayim for the sake of heaven. And that, you know what, we human beings are able to do so. That we human beings are able to take tefillin, are able to take parchment, are able to take wool and turn it into an act of holiness, to the extent that we say, Asher kiddishanu, that you have sanctified us through this mitzvah, and that the mitzvah has become holy as well. A minute ago, there was a piece of parchment or a piece of leather laying there in the tannery, and you now took it and you decided that you're going to make a pair of tefillin of this, or there was a bit of a bundle of wool sitting over here and you decided that you're going to take that bundle of wool. What is that bundle of wool? That's nothing. You can make agboots out of it if you want to. They make agboots out of wool, no?
With the skin.
Yeah, but in the inside is wool, right? You can make agboots out of it. Or you can take and make tzitzit, talit out of it. And it suddenly becomes holy. The agboots aren't holy. It suddenly becomes holy. This is a very empowering thought that God has given us. It's an unbelievable thing. It's an unbelievable trust that God has given us with all of the blessings of this world. Now we can understand what we mentioned last week, which we began the shiur and we will conclude the shiur with. We began the shiur last week, if you remember, with a very interesting Gemara in Bechorot. The Gemara says about Sabe Debe Atuna, the great scholars of the house of Athens, of Atuna, that they asked a very interesting question to Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanina. And he gave him a very interesting answer. They asked him, we have a pit in the field, a bore. We have a, how do you say a bore? A hole, a pit, a hole in the ground. But it's in a public place. It's in the field. We have no use for it in the field. We want to drag it into the city. Can you do it? Can you drag it in for us? And he said, no. He told him, if you make ropes out of chaff, the chaff of the wheat, then I can pull it in for you. Nonsensical answer. Basically what he told him, Rashi explains, just like you cannot make ropes out of chaff, out of the what's another word for chaff? Like the straw of the wheat. Yeah, it's not even the shell. It's like the husk of the wheat. So too, you can never pull in your pit in the Reshut HaRabim, from the Reshut HaRabim from the public domain to the city, from the field to the city. What was their intention? Their intention was as follows. They told him, Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanina, we as human beings, and remember, these were philosophers, these were scholars, these were the greatest thinkers in the world. And they preoccupied their time with things of value, with purpose, how to be constructive human beings, how to be refined human beings. They were great thinkers. They told them, Rabbi Yeshua, a human being has very damaging characteristic traits. We've got things about us that are damaging. We've got those four elements: the fire, the wind, the earth, water, that makes us who we are. We've got our physical passions, our pleasures, our desires. They are very damaging to a human being. They are destructive forces, like a pit in a public place. A pit in a public place is no good. What are you going to do in a pit in a public place? It's dangerous. People can fall. It could cause a stumbling block. People can die, cause injury. So too, spiritually, we have very damaging things that if it's not controlled, if it's not in a controlled setting and environment, very damaging. And that is human impulses. They're very damaging. We are great scholars. We want to know and find out, how can we bring them under control? How can we make them constructive? How can we bring them in the city? Now, you have a pit and you bring it into the city. You have a pit in the city. There's many things you can do with it in the city. You can put water in there. You could use it for storage. You could use it for your advantage. You could use it for things that are constructive. But out there in the open, what are you going to do? You're going to travel 3.5 hours to take out a couple of potatoes from a pit and travel back. So all it is a nuisance. It's a hazard. You're going to store water 5 hours from where you live. It's no good to you. So it's a hazard. It's not a constructive thing. How can we cause our human side of us and who we are as human beings to be constructive and not be destructive? That was their question. And he answered them, you can't. You cannot. Because you don't have the pulling power to do so. You don't have those thick ropes. V'Yaakov hevel in halato. Jacob his inheritance is like a rope. And you know what it says why Jacob his inheritance is like a rope? These are the 613 commandments, that each one of them is like a separate strand of the rope that solidifies and strengthens and is able to pull us and attach us to godliness. You can't. There's a famous philosopher, can't remember his name, who was indeed a very great philosopher, and would preach to his disciples philosophy and how a human being can be great and noble and great thinkers and etc., etc. And one time his disciples came to visit him and they saw him behaving in a very demeaning fashion. They looked at him with a questioning look and he says, what you see now is not the philosopher that you know. When you see me in the university, that's the philosopher that you know. Couldn't bridge the gap between his public life and his private life. What he taught, what he preached, and how he acted were two different things. There was a big bridge between the two. This was the question of the Sabe Beatuna, of the scholars of the house of Athens. They did want to bridge the gap. They were noble people, great scholars, but Rabbi Shua ben Hanan told them, you can't, because you will not given the tools to do so. The Almighty commanded the Jewish people. When you command, you enjoin, you empower them. When God gave us the Torah, He gave us the ability to sanctify mortal life, physical life. When He said, "V'asu li mikdash v'shachanti betocham," make for me a sanctuary and I will dwell within them and within you. He gave us and empowered us and gave us the ability and the opportunity to take the physical things and to uplift them for God. Asher kiddishanu, to make us holy. This is by the power of God's command and by the power of the Torah. And I always have this argument with people. And I always say, what is greater? Someone who gives or does an act of goodness or charity or whatever it is because he wants to, he's motivated to do so out of the goodness of his heart, or someone who does it because he's commanded to do so. And of course, the regular, normal thinking person will say, the one who does it out of the goodness of his heart, not the one who feels that he does it because he's commanded. But the fact is that the attitude of the sages is the exact opposite. As the Gemara says, Gadol ha-mitzuveh v'oseh mishe'enu mitzuveh v'oseh. Great is he who is commanded and obligated to do than he is not commanded and obligated to do. Why? Because the one who's commanded, he's empowered by God, not only just to do an act of goodness or charity. He's empowered by God to take that material thing and elevate it, make it holy. This no human being can do. Only when he's enjoined by the power of God or by the purpose of God or by the command of God, of the Torah. And these are the ropes that Rabbi Yeshua was talking about. You don't have solid ropes. The rope of Hevel Yaakov, Hevel Nahalato, the inheritance of Jacob, of the house of Jacob, of the Jewish people, is a very thick rope made up of 613 strands, the 613 commandments. That's what gives us the strength to bind and to take the weakness of man and bring it in and make it constructive. Bring it into the city and make it useful, make it constructive and uplift it. That is something that comes by the command of God. V'asu li mikdash v'shachanti betocham. Make for me a sanctuary. That very command of God empowered us to cause the divine presence to reside in everything that we do. Even copper mirrors that were used in Egypt can become a symbol of holiness, can become a symbol of sanctity. This is the reason why the Isha Sotah, you may recall that we discussed on previous occasions, the wayward woman who was warned by her husband not to associate with a particular person, and she was seen to go in privacy with this individual person. Now, we know that if a woman commits adultery, she can no longer live with her husband. How are we to know? Now the husband now is upset. He's distraught. On the one hand, he has a suspicion that maybe her wife did not behave appropriately, but he has no proof. He has no proof. And the Torah seeks that there should be harmony between husband and wife. There should be harmony, there should be love, there should be sanctity, because it is crucial to who we are as a nation, to our continuity. And therefore, the Almighty commanded something extraordinary. That you take water from this laver, from this copper wash basin, and you write the name of God on a parchment and you dip it in this water. And she will drink this water. And if she is innocent, she will return home and she will bear a child. God will bless her with a child. Even if she was barren, it says. Even if she wasn't able to have children, she will be blessed with a child, all in order that there should be harmony and sanctity. And an important lesson for the husband and wife. But if not, if she sinned, then this water will cause her whole intestines to blow and bloat, and she will die from it. From all the items in the temple, this was chosen as the item, you know why? As a lesson to her. What's the lesson? Your ancestors in Egypt used mirrors to create a nation. Use these mirrors of which we now hold the water in. And water is a symbol of the physical identity of who we are and what we are. They used it for holy and noble acts. They didn't use it for vanity. They used it for spirituality. They used it as an opportunity to express their faith to our husbands, that we believe in the future. We believe that what Yaakov and Yosef told us, that God will redeem us. And therefore, we must have normal family lives. We must have children. We cannot submit and succumb to the decree of Paro and allow him to break us physically, emotionally, or spiritually. She must learn this lesson from her ancestors, from her matriarchs, who behaved in the way that they did. And this will be a reminder for her to behave in the way of sanctity and of holiness, to conduct ourselves in a proper way, to remind herself not to stray, not to allow herself to stray. And if she was innocent, well, that will be an extra encouragement to live normal, proper family lives with her husband, and she will be blessed for it. But if she didn't, that sanctity that was initiated by her ancestors, by the early matriarchs of Egypt, that behaved in the way that they didn't, cause such holiness and sanctity to the extent that even Moshe Rabbeinu did not realize and recognize, it would be too much for her. Because she was the exact antithesis, the exact opposite of what this represents. And she will not be able to continue to live. This helps us understand a verse in Tehillim that David HaMelech says, Mi ya'aleh bahar Hashem, u'mi yakum b'mkom kodsho. Who will arise to the mountain of God, and who will stand in his holy place? Neki chafayim u'bal levav. Clean hands and a pure heart. The traditional explanation of clean hands is that a person conducts his affairs, his business in an honest way, and that he has a pure heart, a good heart. He's a person of heart, he has emotions and sincerity. But now we can understand a little bit differently. That a clean hands and a pure heart refers to a certain level of sanctity. There's a correlation between purity of heart and sanctity of hands, or purity of hands and emotions and sincerity of heart. Because when a person has sincerity of heart, he's so able to elevate himself that even his hands, which represents his extremities, is able to be uplifted, and he's able to stand Behar Hashem b'mamkom kodsho, in a very lofty and very elevated place. Perhaps this is yet another reason why the sages tell us that the Jewish people were redeemed out of Egypt in the merit of B'zchut Nashim Tzadkaniyot, in the merit of the righteous women. Just another addition, just another teachings that righteous women taught us. How to take the physical world, and women we know are very intuitive. They're able to tap into things that men cannot tap into. It's interesting to note how the sages say that without any coordination one with the other, they intuitively understood to bring their mirrors. Even though it seems a very paradox, what do you bring your mirrors for? And they intuitively understood together without any coordination with other women to bring it to the tent of Moshe, to the Ohel Moed, to the place of meeting, to the holiest place at that time that existed. Intuitively they knew this. So when you have this mindset, it's no wonder that you're able to bring redemption to your private life and to your communal life. And as we mentioned before, if it wasn't for this attitude of the women, their hope, their faith, their constant encouragement, their knowing intuitively what's right and how to go about it and how to do it, we wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't be here today. Okay, we'll stop here.